What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Pioneer video. And with the regional championship in Atlanta just a few days away as of the recording of this video, we are going to take a look at the meta as it's currently shaken out, kind of go over some of the decks and some potential storylines that could happen at the RC as we come to the eve of one of the biggest tournaments that we're going to have that is not a Pro Tour. So if you are interested in videos like this and others, of course, please consider subscribing to the channel, ring the notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. And if you go into the link in the description down below, you have a link to my Discord server as well. Feel free to follow that link and join over there as well. So the Pioneer metagame, we've had a big shakeup to kind of give some context, I guess, to what we're looking at, because I am only getting the percentages and stuff of like the last 7 days. Of course, we've had some other events, longer than a week ago, but by and large, we've had like a week, and then we had the challenges, and then we had a few of like the preliminaries and stuff as well. So while this obviously is going to be accurate because it is not the most possible data that we could attain, this is going to give us an idea of probably the about percentages, or at least the decks that we are very likely to see in the meta as we get ready for RC Atlanta. So first off, I think the biggest winners of the bannings, of course, we had Karn the Great Creator get banned, and we had Geological Appraiser get banned, along with Smuggler's Copter being unbanned. The top two decks, no surprise, they were in like the top 3 or 4 decks. I believe Is It Phoenix was the most played deck up to that point, and then Rakdos Midrange was like the second or third. I think it was second, but they're holding stout at the very top. With Is It Phoenix having a very powerful game plan of just getting to kind of interact with the board, stall the game long enough if it needs to put a bunch of Phoenixes into play. And of course, the benefit of getting to do that is most of their spells end up drawing cards and replacing themselves. So even if you return 2 Phoenixes, hit your opponent for 6, and then they end up casting a Supreme Verdict, or they end up using a removal spell on both of them, what have you, you are still able to, on the next turn, cast a Treasure Cruise, get you some extra card advantage, cast an Opt, and maybe like the lockpick adventure half of the new fairy, and all of a sudden you have a fully stocked graveyard. You're potentially getting back another Phoenix, and you're getting at least the 2 that you cast back, with the potential setup to do it all over again on the next turn. So just a very resilient deck. It's got some tools on the sideboard as well to kind of help against graveyard hate. If you try to get rid of their Phoenixes and interact with like their stuff that way, try to make their Treasure Cruises a little bit worse, it's more than likely not going to work, because they do have a workaround to getting past that sort of situation. So Is It Phoenix? I don't know if rightfully so is at the top, but a very powerful deck and a very important player, I think, in the early meta going forward. So definitely going to be one of the decks to beat. And on top of that, a deck that has been around forever and really kind of got an upgrade after being at least one of the most played decks, or one of the 3 most played decks for quite a while, in Rakdos Midrange. So like Rakdos Midrange, we know, is the super grindy deck. All of its cards play well offensively and defensively. And of course, like Shieldred is just like a nightmare to deal with once it hits the board. And between all the thought seizes, between the pressure from the board and everything, like a Shieldred is just kind of like backbreaking. And even if you have a way to deal with it, obviously you're still getting beat down by the board. Your hand is still pretty depleted because of thought seizes and things like that. And it's just a deck that plays very well, in the early, mid to late game as well. Obviously, Is It Phoenix is doing something right where it has just one more deck list than Rakdos Midrange, but usually I think midrange decks, and even we'll see later, like these control decks like Azorius Control, do pretty well in like new metas, just because people are trying different things. And I think Azorius Control can kind of, in part, Rakdos Midrange can kind of like nullify some of those strategies as well, and kind of punish players for trying to innovate. That said, we get some very powerful decks that kind of come through in innovation, and as long as they do something very powerful, they're worth kind of like playing and testing and trying to make them as optimal as possible. And right there we have Abzan Amelia combo, which is a new deck. People were playing it before the bannings and stuff, when we had Geological Appraiser and Karn, but it really didn't see much play just because of all the other stuff that was going on. Of course, the Geological Appraiser deck was probably the de facto combo deck because you just resolve your spell and the game is over. But this one in particular is really interesting. So Abzan Amelia, you can essentially win on turn 3, and even if your opponent has a way to like interact with your whole board, they Supreme Verdict you, you're still able to set up, bring everything back, blow up the board, and present a lethal attacker in play for the next turn. It's pretty insane. It's akin to something like Yawgmoth in Modern, where you're trying to assemble, a few creatures on board that by themselves really don't do a whole lot. Although I would argue that like Wild Growth Walker and Amelia actually do more work than like a Young Wolf or a String Root Geist. But the average power level obviously isn't there like it is in Modern. But this combo does just have the de facto way of just like killing your opponent on turn 3, where like in Yawgmoth you're basically needing like an Undying Creature or like 2 Undying Creatures or Dying Creature Patch or whatever, your namesake card, and then like a Blood Artist or something like that to win the game, or like a Grist as well to drain them for lethal, where this deck it's self-contained into those 2 to 3 cards, where you're just able to go off, make a 20 power thing, blow up the board, and more than likely kill your opponent on that same swing. It's definitely going to be a deck I would expect to see a lot of. Just the fact that it's a deck that has, turn 3 capabilities of winning the game while also being able to kind of just be annoying, get some instant life gain. It doesn't have to necessarily trade or block with its creatures because it can gain, upwards of like 6-7 life by the time it needs the combo, which of course is enough time to put a big thing into play and then kill your opponent with that. Moving on into the 4 and 5 spot, we have Rakdos Sacrifice, Azorius Control. Rakdos Sacrifice really isn't too different of a deck, and by that I mean we've seen this floating towards like the top of the metagame, like Rakdos Midrange, Rakdos Sacrifice, they kind of overtake each other depending on how people were feeling, and solidly now it looks like at least in the early times Rakdos Midrange is up here with Rakdos Sacrifice kind of hanging out towards the bottom, but still the 4th most played deck in the same archetype as the 2nd most played deck is really impressive. Mayhem Devil in like some of these like Amelia, like the Amelia combo decks, maybe a little bit worse because you're basically going to take out their life gain thing, and then you're going to end up paying 3 life each time you're going to target the namesake card of the deck. But all in all, like Rakdos Sacrifice is just super grindy and really can just kind of take over a game in a way with like its pieces, getting to stunt a lot of offense while also just not really doing anything and not having to spend its resources until it absolutely has to. So Rakdos Midrange, or excuse me, Rakdos Sacrifice, holding down that 4th spot, and of course rounding it out, Azorius Control, which I think control decks are pretty good in early metas. Like I was saying before, like Rakdos Midrange, people are going to be trying out some new strategies. They're going to be trying out some weird builds of some other decks that have already existed in the format, and they're just going to kind of like throw stuff at the wall, see what sticks. Usually what happens in like these new metas, and even though we've had like Izzet Phoenix, Rakdos Midrange out of the gate was going to be the top decks to be played, Azorius Control players can kind of anticipate seeing those, but then also like putting in cards that are able to interact very well with some of the other potential threats of the format. I think as the format goes on, I think Azorius Control sees a little less play just because it's not nearly as flashy. It's I think a higher skill level deck that gives you like very little reward for being good at it. That doesn't mean it's not worth playing. I just think that it's like less satisfying a lot of the time because the games you lose, you just absolutely get crushed in, and you never seem like you draw the right half of your deck, which happens with any deck. But Azorius Control, it feels especially worse because you just feel kind of helpless at certain points. Going further, we have Gruul Aggro, Azorius Lotus Field, 5-color Enigmatic Fighters, Bant Spirits, and Quintorius combo. Nothing that's really too different. Really, this like Amelia combo deck, Quintorius combo deck, kind of inching closer towards a decent metagame share. As we go on, noticeably like Convoke, Hidden Strings, Humans, Boros Aggro, and Selesnya Angels kind of like falling down and actually seeing less play as a result of the bannings. So that is kind of the meta that we're looking at, and like the frame of mind that we're looking at when we look into potential details and like things and happenings of the RC in terms of like the main event. So, what do I expect to happen at the RC? Well, I think this is going to be a coming out party for Amelia Combo, and it's weird to say that because I believe it won a preliminary and it's put up some top 8 and quite a few decks in like the top 16 of like the challenges the past weekend, and it's consistently doing well in the preliminaries. And I think it just has some of the tools early on to be really powerful. It doesn't necessarily fold to Graveyard Hate because its combo can just be found with Quarter Calling and Collected Company. And simply just removing their things aren't that well either because there's a little reanimator aspect in there with the Extraction Specialist and Return to the Ranks, and you're able to just return all of your key pieces, if your opponent blows them up. And even when you blow them up because of your Amelia trigger, you still can find a Return to the Ranks, and if you have a ton of mana to pump into it, you can get more creatures back than just your combo and everything, and set back up again to be able to do it as long as your opponent keeps just being able to get rid of like your Amelia, which can be really annoying for them because then they're not adding to the board. They're having to keep up mana on their turn, or on your turn, excuse me, to potentially remove your things. And if you don't try to combo, then they could tap out to do something, but then you Collected Company or Quarter Calling and you just end up comboing out of nowhere. So definitely has a lot of tools that interact favorably, I believe, with the top players in the metagame. Even though that these are the more removal heavy decks, like these decks are very likely to have just immediate removal right away for your Amelia, and it's only going to cost them 3 life and a few mana. But eventually, like, your opponent has to draw like 5-6 removal spells, and that's just for Return to the Ranks, and then eventually you just assemble the combo again, but with the actual spells. So I mean, they have to deal with the same Amelia and the same Wild Growth Walker and the same Lunarch Veteran, like, I don't know, like 2 or 3 times. Like, it's physically the same one, upwards of that many times. And then, of course, you are playing the other copies and things like that. So definitely some things to keep an eye on, kind of as we go forward. That I think the Amelia combo deck is going to have, this kind of like grand entrance to a major event. And while maybe it's not going to win the event, I would kind of like hinge my bets, of course, on like the top 2 decks, namely Rakdos Midrange. I feel like Rakdos Midrange is going to be played a lot more than Izzet Phoenix. I could be wrong, but I've seen like some other Phoenix variants being very representative of the metagame. With that being said, we'll probably see more like Izzet Phoenix, Dimir Phoenix, Rixus Phoenix, whatever, than we will like Rakdos Midrange and potentially Rakdos Sack as well. So yeah, look to like one of these 2 decks or one of these 2 archetypes like winning the event, but I would not be surprised if the Abzan Amelia combo put at least like 1 or 2 copies in the top 8 as well. Like, I think these ones will, obviously one of them will put someone in the top 8. Like, there's probably at least going to be one of each of these just because of the number of players. But I think Amelia combo can attack the format in a specific way to where it could possibly get 2 copies in the top 8. Obviously giving it a really good chance to take down the event. Azorius Control, I think, is like a solid option to take. I think just in a meta that you're comfortable with playing, where you kind of know what your top decks are going to be. I mean, we see like 3 decks with north of a 15% metagame share, again, like with a week's worth of data, all separate. I mean, like 3rd and 1st are separated by 2 decks, for what it's worth, and then 3rd and 4th are separated by 15, if that tells you anything. So being able to go into a meta where you kind of know what's going on here, and you have that combination of like Graveyard Hate plus interaction for this, I think makes Azorius Control a pretty attractive like offer, I guess, or an attractive deck to play in terms of interacting with the probably new best combo deck in the format, and then 2 old, just won't go away decks, which, side note, I think is kind of a travesty that they didn't ban like Fable and then like something else from Izzet Phoenix, just to try to like lower their rates and force them to innovate more. Even if Rakdos got like Smuggler's Copter, it's pretty insane. So overall, it's going to be interesting seeing how obviously the RC meta shakes out. I don't think we're going to be getting any sort of like percentages or anything like that until we get to the day of the event, in which the deck lists become public, and we will kind of see what happens and what goes on, how the players follow it. I believe there's somewhere around like 800 to 1,000 players, and I think it can go upwards like 1,600 is like the cap or something like that. There's going to be a lot of players. It's going to be a big event. We're going to see a lot of deck lists that we're either going to find like the players that are trying to hone in on a specific few decks to try to maximize game 1 potential, and then kind of like correct in games 2 and 3 if they don't play against them. Or what I think is probably the best approach is just arguably bringing the best 60 cards to go through your game plan, and then from the sideboard, try to improve from there. I think it's just like a philosophy for me. It's a lot easier to cut from like 4 ofs than it is like 1s and 2 ofs, in my opinion. And it sounds weird, but it is what it is. Like, obviously, I'm going to be here. I'm going to be watching the event, and I'm not playing there yet, hopefully. So we'll see what happens. So that is the Pioneer metagame breakdown plus RC pre-show slash predictions, I guess. So to sum it up, Pioneer is going to be crazy. I mean, we're gonna see some new faces, some old faces up at the top tables, I believe, and we might see a new best deck in the format after this week. Amelia combo is looking very strong, and we see the Yawgmoth deck currently in Modern being the most played deck in the format because of a few bannings. Like, we could see a few bannings, and Amelia combo just end up kind of like taking over the Pioneer metagame. So that's my thoughts, opinions. If you have any thoughts or opinions like that, if you have any predictions, please leave them in the comments down below, or join the Discord server and message me on Discord, in the server. I would really appreciate it. And of course, if you are not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more content, please consider subscribing and ring the notification bell. That's gonna do it for me. Hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one.